So, Keith, as unreal as Bill 36 seems, we've got another, what I would call a doozy, Bill 50.
Yes.
What is Bill 50?
Well, Bill 50 is a mess. And Bill 50 might be the key piece in what we soon might be learning is a major scandal. And I say that cautiously. Um, Bill 50 is a piece of legislation that removed the checks and balances that were in place uh, for when new major electrical transmission lines are proposed for the province. And what's happened is through Bill 50, the government has proposed a $16 billion, that was B, billion,
B with the bill, B with the billion with the
billion
B.
with, yeah, upgrade in quotation marks to our transmission system. To put it in perspective, Ontario is doing one and they're three times our size. Theirs is 4 billion. Similarly with BC, theirs is 3 billion.
Okay, so
The
what's the
upgrades.
justification for the upgrade?
Well, there's there's what they claim, and you can't drive and listen to AM radio without hearing the ads from Altalink and ATCO about how we need to upgrade our system. By the way, we're paying for those ads, and they get 9% return on them the way the system works. How can I explain this? The Bill 50 lines that have been proposed made no sense to anybody who understood the system. The reason it didn't make any sense is there's so over capacity. Okay, it would be like putting in a 10-inch hose to connect to your garden hose at your house.
Okay,
Makes no
but
sense.
are they planning for the future, or maybe Alberta the population is going to grow?
Well, and that's their line. That's their line. But here's what's happened recently to tie it all together because there was a lot of people making different allegations as to why they were doing this. But last Tuesday, Wikileaks, which we're all familiar with, released cables, confidential government cables from Paul Cellucci, who was the U.S. ambassador to Canada in 2003.
Right.
And he had a meeting with the then Minister of Energy, Murray Smith. And in a confidential official government dispatch, he wrote back to Washington at what happened in this meeting. These things are available online on a number of different websites. Actually, it's up on the New Democrats website. It's up on the Wild Rose website. It's all over the place right now. But what happened was it's clear now from those communiques that the government had a secret arrangement with the United States, and the plan was to either build a nuclear power plant in the Peace River country, which has been talked about, and Bruce Power's got an office in Peace River. You know, it's talking about building a nuclear power plant up there, or taking surplus generation from coal and cogeneration from the oil sands, and supplying that electricity down to the United States. The problem is the cost of building the transmission line. So shortly after this cable exchange, Murray Smith, the then Minister of Energy, announced that they were changing the cost formula whereby the utility companies paid a large portion of the cost of building transmission lines. Without any pre-warning, the minister announced that from that point forward, the ratepayers, you, me, Cargill, Lakeside, all of the businesses, all of the industry would pay 100% of the transmission costs.
So
Okay?
the users are paying for the infrastructure for power to be exported to the U.S.
Exactly. And the problem is, and there's no risk to the line companies. After we pay for them, we don't own them. These aren't like roads, schools, and hospitals. After we pay 100% of the cost plus 9% rate of return on investment, that's what these companies get. No risk. You and I should start a utility company, by the way. Um, uh, they own the infrastructure. It's bizarre. No other province does this. So
By the way, owning utility companies a monopoly usually can work out well for you. But
yeah,
who
we're seeing
who
that.
yeah, who comes up? Why? Where did this come from? Like who dreamed up this idea that the users inside the province should pay for the infrastructure and don't even own it?
That we now know that. We now know why. It was to allow. It's not cost effective for utility companies to pay the cost of these transmission lines. $16 billion, Sean. That is a huge amount of money. That's more than we spend on healthcare and education combined.
Okay, so
And
let's link this
so,
back to agriculture. Why
sure.
should farmers and ranchers be concerned about this?
Because for a number of reasons. One is if you're an irrigator, it's going to add a significant cost to your electricity costs on your irrigation and your pivots. But more importantly, all of the food processors in Alberta, all of the packing plants are classed as industrial users. And over the next 6 years, their power rates are going to triple. Okay? They're going to triple. And electricity is a huge input cost into packing plants. And so, what happens if Lakeside's power rates triple? What happens if Cargill, High River triple? What's that going to do to the economics of that plant? Is it still going to be viable? Are they going to try and take the cost off of the cattle producer? I think from those I've talked to, it's more likely that those plants will have to close. They simply will not be economic. With the refrigeration, the automation in those plants, they use a huge amount of electricity. Tripling their electricity rates could force them out of business. If that happens, what happens to the feedlot sector in Alberta? What happens to the cow-calf sector? What I'm told is we'll become basically a huge pasture for the United States and supplier of cheap background cattle. The Alberta Food Processors Association has done an analysis on this and is concerned that many of their members will be forced out of business or forced to relocate. Those food processors employ a large number of manufacturing jobs, but more importantly for farmers, they purchase a huge amount of inputs, whether it's canola oil or sugar from the Rogers plant or potatoes or grains, whatever, from Alberta farmers, from dairy farmers, from and so on. So this could cause us farmers to lose a ready, accessible market for their goods, forcing us to look further afield and getting into lower cost markets or lower priced markets, which will hurt the bottom line for farmers. This is a wasted, unnecessary overbuild of our system.
I'm confused because Alberta, a lot of people, a lot of companies, and a lot of people have moved to Alberta because of what we always termed or coined the Alberta advantage.
Yes.
And so, whether that's people moving from Europe to farm, or that's companies that are setting up factories and plants, and that are supporting the agricultural infrastructure that's in place.
Right.
Why, in your opinion, have we turned on a dime, where it seems that all of a sudden we are not very friendly to some of these industries?
Well, you point out that at one time we had the Alberta advantage. I mean, we had, the lowest feed costs, we had the lowest electricity rates, we had the lowest energy rates, and so much has changed. We had low regulatory compliance costs. To be candid with you, what's happened here is, and I've given this a lot of thought and a lot of study, and I've reviewed lots of things and interviewed lots of people. I think what's happened is the government has completely lost touch with the realities of the marketplace, of what Alberta businesses need, and the bureaucracy is living a fantasy. They're creating these pieces of legislation that are costly, that are undermining of our market economy, that are burdensome. This whole idea that I mentioned in a previous interview about under Bill 36 now the government can appoint an official to prepare a management plan and tell you how to run your business. That's just bizarre. That's not Alberta. But that's what they're doing. So I think that's what's driving it. The government's completely lost touch of what the needs are. And rather than having less government intervention, more checks and balances on costs like this whole energy scheme, they're taking those checks and balances away and letting the bureaucracy run amok.
So who owns these transmission lines if they get built?
Who owns them will be the two line companies. And AltaLink, interestingly enough, hires SNC-Lavalin, a well-known construction company, to do the engineering, procurement, and construction management. Guess who is the 100% owner of AltaLink? SNC-Lavalin. This thing smells bad all the way around. When you look at the WikiLeaks cables, you look at the decision by former ministers to shift the burden onto the ratepayers. No other province does that. You look at the checks and balances that were removed from Bill 50, and it's clear now that these power lines are being built for export. And I have no problem and support the idea of looking to the future and building infrastructure for the future. And I have no problem with exporting power. But if we're going to build these lines for power export, it should be the utility companies that pay for it, not us.
Yeah. Would you think this would be more? We could take this if the users were going to pay, we're going to basically essentially pay for the transmission lines, that we would actually own them. Then do you think it makes sense?
Only if the business case can be made. And what I'm told, the reason they did this is the business case isn't there. For example, there's been 2 studies done to bring inexpensive hydropower from Manitoba to Alberta. Okay, move it west. Once they figured out the cost of the transmission line and added that in, it was cheaper to continue to use coal and natural gas power from Alberta, right? Mm-hmm. You have to do the business case. You can't say, oh, well, let's ship cattle to Russia for a market without factoring in the cost of getting it there and the logistics. So the reason why they put in Bill 50, the reason they took away the public needs assessment was because they knew that these power lines would not pass that public scrutiny. It's too obvious it's a massive overbuild. The plan is to export it. The plan is to trick Albertans into paying for it. The reality is it will hurt the food processing sector. It will hurt the agricultural sector. It could fundamentally change the cattle business in Alberta. And on this one, guess we talked in another interview about PC leadership candidates. Well, figure this out. Ted Morton announced the day that the Wikileaks came out, which was in the 3rd week of May of 2011. Ted Morton, who is the architect of Bill 36 and a leadership candidate, former Minister of Finance as well, he announced that he's opposed to the Bill 50 lines, that he would stop the Bill 50 lines because he's concerned they're a massive overbuild, and he's concerned, he used very strong language, that the building of these lines will cause Alberta businesses to become uncompetitive and will hurt Alberta businesses and all of the value-added activities that occur in Alberta. Exactly what people like me and the industrial power consumers and other groups have been saying for well over a year. So now we've got leadership candidates. Doug Horner has also indicated some concern about the Bill 50 lines, Alison Redford and Gary Marr as well. So now we've got leadership contenders coming out, most strongly Ted Morton, saying this Bill 50 is a bad idea. We got to rethink these lines. We got to pause.
I always love a change of heart.
Oh, God.
I got another thought here. Is why is so we've talked about being unfriendly to food processors and being unfriendly to the ag sector, specifically in this case packing plants and beef producers. Why are we being so friendly to the line companies?
You're trying to get me in trouble. Well, let me put it this way. Why are we being so friendly to line companies? Well, if you look at the donor list to the PC party, you'll see that the line companies have been major donors. If you look at who sponsored the annual general meeting of the PC party in 2010, you'll see that it was the line companies. If you look at who's on the board of directors of Altalink, you will recognize some former PC cabinet ministers. There is an extremely tight relationship. Oh, even better example. The vice president, Lee Clark, the vice president of Altalink, who you hear on the radio jingles. Hi, I'm Lee Clark. I'm here from Altalink to keep the lights on at the distraction move while they drive the Brinks truck up to our wallets. He, up until very recently, was the vice president for the PC party with direct access to the premier's office and the party establishment. So there's a lot, one of the things that the WikiLeaks cables confirm is why the massive overbuild. Why are we so overbuilding this system? And the answer is for export. So we now have an answer to a very important question of why we're doing 16 billion when provinces twice our size in terms of generation and consumption are only doing 3 and 4 billion. But what we don't have answers to is what happened behind the scenes in 2006, 7, 8, and 9 that caused the government to award these contracts without tender to AltaLink and ATCO, and what discussions and what arrangements were made behind the scenes to cause them to bring into Bill 50. Those questions are troubling, and we don't have answers to them, and we should.
Well, Keith, I appreciate joining us today. I'm never big on conspiracy theories, but this isn't a conspiracy theory at all. This just seems to be more unbelievable than anything. So thank you much for joining us, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.